Hello everyone, and welcome back for another edition of the Money Pros. I'm Oliver Tutt, certified financial planner practitioner, and I'll be your host for the next half hour as we talk about all the issues related to your money, how to make it, how to keep it, and hopefully how to help it grow. Let me give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about on today's show. First off, we're talking about the college debt crisis. This is a recurring theme on the Money Pros. It's one that affects me personally as well as millions of Americans, but we haven't talked about it in a little while. I want to give you a little idea of how much worse it's actually gotten. So some cheery news to start off this Money Pros episode. So we're going to talk about the numbers. We're also going to talk about some plans that are being floated to try to repair the crisis. So that's first up. In our second segment, we have our real estate pro, Chad Kritzas with HomeSmart Professionals Real Estate. We're going to be talking about what sellers need to do to get in the right mindset and their considerations that they're going to need to have if they're going to leap into this hot seller's market. So Chad's going to help us with some of those things. So that's up. And then in our third segment, question we get all the time. We've talked about it on the show before, and I think it's worth revisiting as we just got out of tax season. How long do you keep all of those financial documents that are probably stacking up in your house? Different documents require different holding periods, so we're going to have some guidance on all of those things. So lots to look forward to in today's show. Let's jump right into it. So I want to talk about the college debt crisis. I've talked about on the show before. I have 4 children. One of them is in college. 3 of them are on their way eventually, hopefully. And one thing that has staggered me, as well as it has for a lot of Americans, is the rising cost of a college education. The expenses at many institutions, private institutions, can be $75,000, $80,000 a year. And for a handful of institutions, it won't be too long before a 4-year degree costs well over $400,000 a year when you factor in tuition and room and board. So it's not a surprise that in order to finance these educations, many students and their parents are turning to student loans. And the degree to which parents and graduates are burdened by student loans is really becoming a significant issue for the economy. So I wanted to talk about some of the numbers because we've recently got some updated numbers for the end of 2018 from the government, Department of Education, various other sources that track student debt. So some of the statistics: 1 in 5 adults carry some student loan debt. So 20% of the population has some type of debt. That affects 44 million people in the United States. So first and foremost, this isn't a narrowly focused crisis. This is a situation that many Americans find themselves in, owing substantial amounts of money for tuition. The total amount of debt, and this is really what becomes almost awe-inspiring, is the total amount of college debt outstanding, $1.47 trillion at the end of 2018. So that's more debt than either auto loans or credit card debt. And I remember on this show, not so many years ago, talking about when student loan debt crossed over the $1 trillion mark. So for it to hit $1.5 trillion nearly is really a milestone that I did not want to see while I was doing this show. Let's throw up a graph, and we're going to talk about the rate to which it's increased. So this graph goes back to 2005. Now that blue line that you see going essentially straight up from left to right, that is college loan debt since 2005. And you can see that it has steadily increased without even a hiccup during the 2008 financial crisis. The other 2 lines you see there, the light gray line being credit card debt, which you see went down during the financial crisis and is gradually increasing, as well as auto loan debt, which also went down during the financial crisis, but has increased at a much more rapid rate, but still isn't at the rate of student loan debt. So to finance these educations, people are borrowing significant amounts of money. Some other statistics that I find troubling. Most people that owe on student loans are young, as you would expect. They're in their 20s and 30s, out of school, etc. But the fastest growing segment of people that owe on college loans are adults 60 years and over. Most of the time, this represents parents that have borrowed money to pay for their children's educations and are still paying off those loans at a time when they really should be thinking about their retirement savings, possibly leaving their jobs and actually retiring. That segment has more than doubled in the past decade in terms of the number of people represented by student loans. Another troubling statistic, and keep in mind student loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, but that doesn't mean people can't default on the loans. The default rate is currently 10.8% for those who began repayment in 2015. So the most recent borrowers are defaulting at an increasing pace, with a 10.8% being the number. All right, we're going to hold it there. We're going to get to our real estate pro, Chad Kritzas with HomeSmart Professional Realty. Some habits are hard to break, Chad, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Money Pros. I'm joined now by our real estate pro, Chad Kritzas with HomeSmart Professionals Real Estate. Not Keller Williams. I'm sorry about that again.
That's all right.
But I think we have an interesting topic to talk about. We're going to be talking about some of the considerations that sellers need to have in their head if they're going to jump into what is a pretty hot seller's market right now. And I think a lot of people are tempted to do that just because the market is so good for sellers. So before we get into that stuff, let's do what we usually do, which is talk about a little bit of a market update where things are at right now. We always like to remind viewers too that this is being taped mid-May, so depending on when you end up seeing this episode, just bear that information in mind. But having said that, where are we at right now? I mean, we're almost half a year into 2019. What do you have for numbers?
So pretty much what you're saying is exactly right. We're seeing a lot of people now that have been waiting even years to get their homes on the market. We just listed one this morning that I've been talking to the gentleman for probably 6 years, and it's just the timing with his tenant leaving was perfect. He said, you know, we've been waiting, and this is the time to sell it. Single family prices up 2%, sales down 2%. So we're starting to see that balance we keep talking about. Multifamily is still the big topic at the moment. Prices up 14%, and sales are down 0.5%. And this is the first time really in recent history that I remember the median price statewide of multifamily homes being higher than that of single family homes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so it's the first time I remember seeing that. Condo pricing up 7%, sales down almost 7%. So we're still seeing that balance that we've been talking about the last few episodes.
Not to dwell on it too much, but what do you think is driving the multifamily home sale prices? Is it because rentals are in such demand so that they can command more rent than maybe they could in the past? Is that a part of the factor?
A few of it, and the Airbnb in certain sections. In Newport and Aquidneck Island, for instance, we have over 600 people coming to the island this August for the War College class, which is a massive class. So they're buying up. Our closing this afternoon was a gentleman in the Navy buying a $650,000 home, and then they buy homes around the country, and they don't sell them, they rent them. So I think this family owns 12 homes around the country.
As they move around with the military.
Yeah, and they just rent them out because they're all near bases.
Right.
So it's a pretty cool concept.
It's not bad.
No, it's a good retirement plan too.
Not quite enough to get me to join the military, but I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So with the market being as good as it is, it's not a surprise that there are a lot of sellers out there that are considering selling property for a variety of reasons, one of which you just talked about. In going over the notes for the show, you really talked about four things that a seller has to think about as they're getting ready to list. And you talked about thinking about the pricing, thinking about the property itself, thinking about how it's going to be marketed, and then thinking about what the closing process is going to be.
Right.
So we should talk about those four things. So let's start with pricing the property, because I imagine that's kind of the beginning, is when you sit down with a client, they've made the decision, or maybe they haven't even quite made the decision, but they've at least gotten as far as talking to you.
Right.
What should they expect out of that process, and what is it like right now that's maybe different than in years past?
Well, I think the most important thing we're going to talk about is pricing a property, right? Because the best time to sell a home is the first 3 or 4 weeks it's on the market. So you hear a lot of the time, well, let's put some extra on the top and then we have room to negotiate. I mean, we hear that all the time. The problem with that is you miss that first month that you're on the market, which is when the property is at its hottest. So that's really the issue. There's a couple issues with the pricing. You know, what's for sale? Right, so if you're just a buyer and you're looking at these homes, are you going to buy this house, or is it out of whack with the other homes for sale? Then you have to look at what's pending, right? Because you're going to look at inventory, but more importantly, what's selling. Now, the reason we do this is because when you're dealing with banks, if it's not a cash deal, which some are, but most aren't, the home has to be appraised. So when the appraiser comes out, we had one last week. I was actually away, and I got a call that said, you know, your home came in $12,000 under appraisal. So the appraisers are coming out, and they're only looking at what's sold over usually the last 6 months, and usually within a couple miles, mattering on the town. So like on the island or Barrington, they only go a mile or 2 miles max. You know, Little Compton, they may go further out because it's so rural. So if the property doesn't appraise, the bank's not giving you the money. So it's either you're going back on the market or you're renegotiating the price. That's really the most important part.
So in in this kind of fairy tale scenario where you price it at what you think is the top of the market, then plus some, and in most circumstances the house is not going to sell as quickly as it should, which is what you're talking about. But you could find yourself in a scenario where you just catch the buyer sleeping or desperate or whatever the situation is, and they make an offer. The deal may still not go through. There's a lot of importance to getting the price correct, not sky high.
And there's no science to it, right? It's how the appraiser's going to look at it. The simple answer is what's selling around that home in that price point. And if you go too high, you're going to have an appraisal issue coming down the road.
So once you've gotten the price set and the agent and the seller agree, all right, this is the range I'm looking for, and everybody's comfortable with the number, then you got to list the property. And in my experience, this was the part of it that I was not prepared for, and it's changed over the years.
Absolutely.
What can you say to a seller about what they should expect with respect to the property itself and getting it ready for sale? Because it's not just a matter of sticking a sign in the front yard and seeing what happens, right?
Or burying the statue by the mailbox. That
I never did that. Maybe I should have tried.
Really, there's a few parts to it. Really, you got to remember that 82%, so this is just a personal stat, 82% of all the clicks on my website, on all of our listings, are on photos. And then when you use the big search engines, right, they're looking at the photos. People buy or preview homes on their iPhone or whatever phone, tablet, laptop. And I had a lady yesterday, she said, well, what newspapers are going to use? And we kind of chuckled, and I said, well, none. Right, because nobody's flying into town and picking up a newspaper. They're going through their phone.
Do you do
scrolling.
those brochures, like the ones you pick up on the stand that was like full of houses and like a little tiny picture you could barely see? Not so much?
Not really.
Okay.
That buyer's one, that's, maybe you're having a pizza for lunch and you pick it up and you're flipping through, but
it's all online.
It's all online now, and everybody's looking online. So really it's the photos. I mean, you have to get ready for the photos, which means decluttering, cleaning up the yard this time of year, and really just making it present well online. I have a rule of thumb, and we've said this before, if you haven't touched it, it's on the kitchen counter in 60 days, just throw it in the closet. Just get it out of the way, make it look less cluttered. That's really most important. And then getting ready for the photos. And a lot of times getting ready for the showings. People aren't really ready a lot of times. Like, well, you put the house on the market today, showings may start tomorrow. Especially in a hot market, people want to get in right away. So we had a host we have a new coming soon category where we can put a home in MLS, but it doesn't go to the exterior sites. And agents were calling us, can we get in? Can we get in? Sorry, we can't get you until Wednesday. But Wednesday comes, you have to be ready.
And I think that's. Do you ever run into situations where sellers, presumably they want to sell the house, but they just perceive the whole thing as a giant inconvenience, and you have people calling and you want to schedule showings and you want to get buyers in at a time that's convenient to them? How do you sort of manage that? Look, we don't want to put you out too much, but you're selling a house here and it's several $100,000 or maybe millions of dollars. You're going to have to accommodate some people. You ever find that that's a challenge?
We literally were having this challenge this morning, and it was less with a homeowner because the homeowner wants to sell it. It's more with the tenant that's getting ready to leave. So we emailed him and said, "Oh, can we do an open house this weekend?" Trying to just shuttle some of those showings over to the open houses to give him some more time to prepare. He said, "No, I'm sorry, but I'll be ready in 3 weeks if you want to do an open house." I said, "Great, that's going to be awesome."
Things are moving too fast for that, but it's constant cleaning. It's constant keeping things decluttered. I mean, we all have lives, stuff stack up on the coffee tables, but it's keeping all that stuff away. That's the other thing you have to kind of be prepared for. What are some of the pitfalls that sellers should be prepared for? I mean, things can go wrong along the way. What are some of the common things that people should just sort of brace themselves for?
Well, I think the big one really is inspections. We talked about appraisals, so I don't want to keep talking about that, but inspections are a big one. And a lot of time when people live in a house for a long time, they may not see a lot of things. They've been there a long time. Or sockets on, or silly things. I was in my attic yesterday with a contractor, and I looked up and I saw some water stains on the insulation. So really, the inspections are the big one that comes. Now, you also a lot of times have septic systems. Right? A lot of times they move to sewers, and sometimes septics are really prevalent. And the seller will always say, "Well, I have no problem with my septic." it's underground. How do you really, unless you have a backup?
Sure, right.
How do you know it's cracked?
Right.
You don't really. So we see a lot of surprises come with septic inspections, and those are very expensive fixes. Those aren't necessarily, unless it's a pipe or a D-box or a baffle filter, those are very expensive
And so that can really upset your equation. I had a client that he told me the story, obviously not acting as his agent or anything like that, but you have an idea of what you're going to sell the house for, and then it fails the septic inspection, and you come up and it could be, percentage points of the sale of the house.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it can really affect your mental math that you've done about, well, this is how much money I'm going to get out to apply to the next place or whatever. So that can really upset the apple cart.
It's even more complicated. Let's say it's a first-time home buyer buying it, and the seller doesn't have the $15,000 to $25,000 to fix it. The buyer, let's say they're doing 3% down, they're not sitting on an extra $15,000. So now you get this, who's going to pay for it?
Right.
And sometimes the answer is nobody, and the deal falls apart.
So lots of challenges along the way, and that's a big one that I never even thought about. But what are some reasonable expectations for how long the house should be on the market? You talked about getting the price right and trying to sell it within 3 or 4 weeks. Should that be the mindset of a seller? Like, if this thing doesn't sell in the next month, it's not going to happen? Or
Well, I think it's when you price a house most effectively, especially in this market, it should go in the first few weeks. But once again, we talk about this all the time. It's hard to take the state of Rhode Island and say the average days on market is 75 days, because each market is so so specific to itself, right? A $700,000 house is not going to have the same market time as a $300,000 house. Right? The interest rates just went down again, so first-time home buyers can still buy very affordably. So you're mattering on the specific market depends on the market time itself. So you can't really generally answer.
So you really need to lean on your agent to say, like, what should I be expecting here, and depend on them to give you an honest answer about, all right, this is kind of the target, and if it goes beyond that, maybe we need to reevaluate some things or whatever. Well, only got a few seconds left. Can you talk to us about the closing, the offer and closing process? Like, what should people expect there? Because it's like the last hurdle, but it's a big deal, right?
There's a couple of things you really want to expect. A lot of people don't know the state of Rhode Island charges you $4.60 per $1,000 of your sale price. They call it tax stamps for the pleasure of selling your home in the state of Rhode Island. So a lot of people, maybe only a couple $1,000s, but when we're back into this equation of figuring out the numbers, sometimes they're not factoring that in. The other thing we're seeing a lot of is closing cost credits. So let's say a buyer makes an offer of $300,000, but they're asking for $5,000 in credits. They're not asking to bring a check, but it's coming off the top of their proceeds to pay for buyer's closing costs. So I like to talk about those sorts of things in advance with a client, because those are the ones that really surprise people a lot.
You don't want to be in a situation where you're like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. There's a lot of different formats that an offer can take that you're going to have to factor into your math as you make a decision as a seller, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot more to explore there, Chad, but we're going to have to hold it there. Thanks very much, as always. All right, up next, we're going to be talking about how long to keep some of those financial documents. Stay with us. There's still more to come. Welcome back to the Money Pros. We get a lot of questions about how long we should hang on to a variety of different financial documents. More and more vendors are going to electronic documentation, but there's still no shortage of paper coming into people's houses. People are confused about how to keep track of these records and how long they need to hang on to this stuff. So I thought we'd talk about, and we've covered this before, but it's worth revisiting because some of the guidance has changed, how long you should keep some of this stuff. So we're going to talk about a variety of different time frames, and then we're going to talk about what documents fall into that time frame. Some things are shorter than others. So let's start off. We'll throw up a slide, and here's what we're going to go through. First, we're going to talk about 1 year time frames. What are things that you need to hang on to for a year, but then you can pitch them after that? So generally stuff like pay stubs, you get your pay stub every 2 weeks or every week or whatever it is, that can be pitched after you get your W-2 at the end of the year. So that information can be verified, and then you can look back and you can throw away the pay stubs if you don't need them anymore. Account statements, kind of the same thing. So you'll get account statements from banks, brokerage firms, and stuff like that during the year, and you can get rid of those once you verify it against a year-end statement. So a good example is a bank statement. You get one a month. Hang on to those for the year. At the end of the year, you should get a year-end statement, and you can then get rid of them once you've confirmed that the year-end statement matches up with the monthly statements. 3 year periods. All right, so this is things like W-2s, 1098s, that's mortgage interest that you've paid for your home, purchase and sale of stock records. This is 3 years after you've sold the stock. So if you still own the stock, you should hang on to those statements. But if you sell something or you purchase something, you want to hang on to those records until 3 years after the security is sold. Eligible 529 expenses would be another category here. Next one up, 6 years. So the IRS can initiate an audit up to 6 years out if you've underreported your income by more than 25%. So this would be the minimum holding period for your tax returns and things like that. Records of business income and expenses, and 1099. So if you're a business owner, at least 6 years of your records for income and expenses there. Next category, 7 years. That's going to be records of worthless securities and bad debts, because that's how long you have to write off those things. So if you have securities that have become worthless or debts that you've had to write off, that's kind of a narrow category. You want to hang on to that stuff for 7 years. And then finally, 10 years is going to be records of foreign taxes paid. This is a quirky one because you're entitled to either a credit on your tax return or a deduction, and you've got 10 years to make a change to that. So unless you've paid a lot in foreign taxes, probably not a big deal. But here's what I want you to consider. A lot of this stuff you can now keep indefinitely. Because many vendors are providing records electronically, you're going to get PDF copies of things like bank statements, brokerage statements, and storage is cheap. You can buy hard drives and back this stuff up online. Of course, you have to be careful of security. That's an important consideration. But you can keep this stuff forever. As a business owner and as an investment advisor, I keep all of my financial records forever for all of my clients. It's really not that intimidating if you get into the habit of doing that. So here's some guidelines for keeping those things for various different points in time. But I would encourage you, particularly if you can get the records in electronic format, to keep this stuff forever, because the storage costs are really so minimal. And it's also not a bad idea to get a scanner, and for those few documents you may still be getting in paper, scanning those into an electronic format so that you can keep those forever. So again, guidelines for how long you need to keep this stuff, but there's no harm in keeping it forever because storage costs for electronic documentation are becoming so inexpensive. All right, that's it for that segment. We'll talk to you again on the other side. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Money Pros. That's all the time we've got for today's show. If you've got a question for one of the Money Pros, be sure to let us know. Find us on Facebook or send us an email at moneypros@foxprovidence.com. We hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you again next Sunday right here on the Money Pros. Take care, folks.